In Russia, people who publicly call for Vladimir Putin to step down usually end up like this, falling out of a window. It's not a figure of speech, it's a pattern that's repeated so often it became a national joke. A dark joke, by the way. That's why when an ordinary woman in Moscow turned on her phone camera, showed her face without a mask, without hiding her identity, and told Putin to resign.
I'm watching explosion videos from Kapotnya, Moscow region. Now already in the Leningrad region and in many others. For how many years have we already seen explosions in the Belgorod and Bryansk regions? Putin, where is our security? You started the SMO without asking us, the people. You simply didn't ask anyone. Guarantee our security, and if you can't guarantee it, step down and resign. Let's ask for his impeachment.
The key question isn't what she said. The important question is something else. What changed so that she wasn't afraid anymore?
He definitely knew that. If he didn't after 25 years of leading the country, he's just a degenerate, unstable. That's another reason for him to resign.
The answer to that question reveals something that no sanction, no drone, and no army can reach. Something that, once it starts to leak out, can't be put back. Putin is losing the one thing that every man in his position needs to survive. And it's not money, it's not oil, it's fear. And when you understand how fear breaks, you understand why a cell phone video scares the Kremlin more than a refinery on fire. Let's start from the beginning. Why is what this woman did something out of the ordinary? Look, for 26 years, the rule in Russia was simple. You can think whatever you want, at home, in silence. But saying it out loud comes at a price. And the price is your life as you know it. Criticizing the war is now a crime with a specific name. They call it discrediting the armed forces. People have already faced fines, criminal charges, and jail for posting just one sentence. There was a case where a resident was officially fined because a man, with what the court described as a male-type voice, spoke badly about the president in a video. The fine document says this in so many words. Just see how absurd this is. The state formally states you will be punished for your opinion. It even uses your tone of voice as evidence. And here's the detail that almost no one notices. Imagine a room with 100 people and 99 of them hate what's happening. But each one thinks they're the only one. No one says a word, not because of the guard at the door, but because of the other 98 who seem to agree with the regime. That's what keeps Russia stuck. It's not prison, it's the silence of the others. There's a name for that. An economist from an American university named Timur Kuran studied why such regimes last so long and then suddenly collapse. He calls it preference falsification. The idea is as follows. In a dictatorship, everyone wears a mask in public. They cheer outwardly but secretly hate. But since no one takes off their mask, each person thinks they're the only one pretending and that everyone else really supports it. Now, think about what that means. If almost the entire population hates the regime, but each person thinks they're the only one who feels that way, do you know what happens? No one does anything. Everyone remains silent, fearing a majority that actually doesn't exist. That's exactly how those 80% approval ratings for Putin always worked. They were never love. It was millions of people assuming that everyone else was still afraid. Because a system built on fear has a fatal weakness, it only needs one thing to start to crumble, something scarier than Putin himself. And that's what appeared. For 3 years, the war was a distant thing for the average Russian. It happened on television in a neighboring country with soldiers who were always someone else's sons. Propaganda took care of the rest. Then, the war crossed the border and knocked on our door. Drones started falling on Moscow and refineries started burning inside Russia. And fuel in one of the largest oil producers on the planet started disappearing from the pumps. The numbers here are hard to exaggerate. By the end of June this year, more than half of Russia's regions were experiencing some kind of gasoline rationing. More than a fifth of the country's refining capacity went offline because of the attacks. The International Energy Agency, which monitors this worldwide, called the level of destruction something unprecedented in the history of the conflict. And there's a phrase that sums it all up. A phrase that wasn't said by Ukraine, but by energy analysts from the West. The attacks on the refineries burst the information bubble. That bubble that state television had built to keep the people away from the reality of the war. Suddenly, the line at the gas station tells a story that the evening news can no longer hide. Now, the average Russian has two fears. The old fear of criticizing Putin, and the new, tangible fear that he feels in his pocket and hears in the sky at night.
A Ukrainian drone wandering around Moscow.
And when two fears collide, one has to give. And then I ask you, in a situation like that, can the state still protect you? The answer to that question came quickly. And it was a resounding no. On June 22nd, the Moscow Stock Exchange had its worst single-day drop since the mobilization in 2022. It closed at the lowest level in more than 3 years, after 15 straight weeks in the red. And here, I need to be honest with you, because that's what separates analysis from cheering. This fall didn't happen because the Russians took to the streets. It happened for cold, hard market reasons. The peace negotiations stalled, central banks' high interest rates, and the prospect of Iranian oil returning to the market and driving the price down. The stock market is driven by fearful money, not angry people. But what the government did to cover the hole is what really shows the desperation. The Russian central bank engaged in a maneuver that an economist described bluntly. Let me explain it to you in a simple way. Look, the bank prints new money. It passes this money on to the banks. The banks then use the money to buy government bonds. And the government spends it, mostly on the war. It's a closed loop. Money created out of nothing to finance the very hole it digs itself. As you may have noticed, this isn't sustainable. And yes, the market has noticed this too. And while the money was burning, the ability to make weapons was burning along with it. On the day of the stock market crash, Ukraine hit a semiconductor factory in the city of Voronezh in western Russia. And the detail matters. According to the Ukrainians, the attack was carried out with the Storm Shadow, a long-range cruise missile manufactured by the United Kingdom. A Western weapon flying deep inside Russian territory to hit a very specific target. Because this factory is not just any factory. It produces the electronic components for the missiles that Russia uses against Ukrainian cities, the chips that work as the brains of these weapons. And do you know why this can't be fixed quickly? Because a chip factory is not just a warehouse. It depends on clean rooms with dust control at the particle level and equipment that, for the most part, used to come from Germany. Now, impossible to buy because of the sanctions. Months earlier, Ukraine had already hit another military chip factory in the city of Bryansk. And independent analysts assess the damage as something that would take years to repair, not months. The most advanced chip technology in Russia today is at a level that the rest of the world had already surpassed back in 2004. It's not a delay of months, it's a delay of decades. And that's the main point of this story. The humiliation. Russia, the oil giant, started borrowing gasoline from Kazakhstan. And there are reports of convoys of Chinese fuel traveling inside Russian territory. The country that used to boast about supplying the world is now knocking on its neighbor's door to fill its own tank. Take a moment to think about that. The Russian state can no longer protect its citizens' savings. It also doesn't protect the factory where they work. It doesn't even protect the gas station on the corner. The contract Putin had with his people was simple, and it kept fear alive. Obey, and I'll give you security. That security is gone, and when the security is gone, it no longer makes sense to keep obeying. And this is exactly where the most dangerous thing for a dictator starts to happen. Fear, unlike money, can't be printed. Unlike gasoline, it can't be imported from Kazakhstan. And once it leaks out, there's no way to pump it back in. Remember what we discussed earlier in the video? About that room with 100 people? That's what it's about. Collective fear only exists as long as each person believes they're alone in what they think. But courage, well, it works the same way, just the other way around. The moment someone speaks in public and survives, they send a signal to everyone else. The signal says it's possible to speak. And then the next person speaks, and that gives permission to the following one. Political scientists call this a cascade. In other words, it starts with a drop, just one person. And before you know it, it's a flood that no one can stop. Those women in Moscow with their faces uncovered are not isolated lunatics. They are the first visible drop.
Putin, where is our security? You started the OME without consulting us, the people. You simply didn't ask anyone. Guarantee our security, and if you can't guarantee it, step down, resign. Let's ask for his impeachment. He thought before doing this, before announcing the OME. He should have known that the air defense system is useless, that the budget was stolen, that there's corruption everywhere. If he didn't know that, after governing the country for a quarter of a century, then he's simply a degenerate, an unbalanced person. One more reason for him to resign.
One of them looks at the camera and says she won't call Putin respectable anymore because the people no longer respect him. She accuses him of having destroyed the country, of sending men to die for a piece of land that nobody asked for, and she does this with her face showing, knowing the price. This has happened before in history, and that's why it gives chills to those who know about it.
He destroyed the sovkhozes, the kolkhozes. There were no fields left, no farms, nothing remained. Now you've sent our men to fight for some piece of land that we don't need at all. We don't need it. We don't want to be bombed. We don't want our sons, husbands, and fathers to die on those battlefronts.
In the late 80s in Eastern Europe, fear seemed eternal. It seemed that way until the eve of the day it evaporated. When a single dissident in Poland showed that it was possible to challenge the regime and survive, the cascade began, and the governments that seemed set in stone fell one after another in a matter of months. It didn't happen slowly. It happened all at once. That's how these things end, slowly and then suddenly. Everything we've seen so far, the stock market, the refineries, the chips. The government can recover. It takes time, it takes money, but it's possible. Not this. No. The day the average Russian realizes they're not alone, there's no undo button. And if this only applied to civilians with cell phone cameras, maybe the Kremlin would breathe easier. The problem is that the leak reached the one place Putin can't allow it to reach. It reached those with weapons. A Russian combat veteran covered in medals recorded a direct appeal to the president. He says that Russian soldiers are being imprisoned, tortured, and extorted by their own commanders. The reason? For refusing to follow suicidal orders. And he demands a meeting with Putin to tell him everything. His warning is explicit. If this conversation doesn't happen, the army will turn its weapons against the Kremlin. This appeal has surpassed 6 million views.
At the moment, dozens, hundreds, thousands of our soldiers are imprisoned in dungeons, punished by their commanders. They are rotting, being subjected to torture and violence by the so-called Gestapo. For having refused to carry out the stupid and suicidal orders, for having refused to hand over their financial resources.
And he was not alone. A group of soldiers, masked, armed, in formation, recorded a video supporting the veteran. They say together that this fire will not be extinguished and repeat the threat to turn their weapons against those responsible for the troops' suffering. And there's the silence that speaks louder than anything. For years, Putin has drawn a nuclear red line. He said that if Ukraine hit Russian soil with Western long-range missiles, it would mean that NATO was at war with Russia and that he would respond accordingly. Well, Ukraine has hit Russian soil with British missiles several times, and the nuclear response didn't come. Maybe those nuclear threats were a bluff from the beginning. Maybe there's some behind-the-scenes restraint that we can't see. But the important point isn't to guess the reason. It's what the Russians are seeing. The greatest threat from their leader was tested in front of the whole world, and it meant nothing. A threat that everyone saw fail stops being scary. And a leader who is no longer scary in a system that only worked through fear has a problem that no amount of money can solve. It's no coincidence Russia's own war propagandists started to panic, fighting among themselves, demanding answers that never come. When the fans start cursing their own team, the game has already turned. From the outside, the verdict is the same. The Chancellor of Germany, Friedrich Merz, summed it up in one sentence. He said it's becoming clear to Moscow that Russia is not going to win this war. Inside, millions of people are coming to the same conclusion, each one realizing slowly that they are not alone.
Ukraine is in a new position of strength. Moscow is starting to realize that Russia will not win this war. And ladies and gentlemen, Europe's support for Kyiv is unwavering. We are determined to increase the pressure on Russia's already strained economy.
So, going back to that woman in Moscow, with her face uncovered, telling the most powerful man in Russia to go away. What changed in her wasn't her courage, it was the calculation she started making in her mind. For 26 years, staying silent was the rational choice. Because every Russian assumed that everyone else was still afraid. The fear of a single man over millions works, as long as each person believes they're alone. But fear is the only reserve that Putin cannot print. He can't import it from Kazakhstan. He can't rebuild it once it's destroyed. A burned refinery can be up and running again in a few months. A chip factory takes years. The day the average Russian realizes he's not alone never comes back. That's exactly how Eastern Europe collapsed at the end of the 80s. Not gradually, but all at once. When silence broke in a chain reaction, and each person who spoke gave permission to the next. No one knows if Russia has reached that point yet. Maybe it's just a woman on a camera, and another winter of fear ahead. But Putin can read history as well as anyone, and that's why a cell phone video should scare him more than a refinery on fire. Because he can rebuild the refinery. That he can't. So here's the question, and I want to know your opinion. If fear is the only thing that can't be rebuilt, has Russia already passed the point of no return, or does Putin still have time to regain control? This story doesn't end here, and this channel will be here to follow every step. Subscribe so you don't miss what's next. See you in the next video.